Hi, everyone. I'm Becky Ferrell, Research Lead and Programming Consultant for Dance Data Project. Our series, Moving Forces, Motherhood and Dance, is composed of rapid-fire conversations with mothers in varying roles in the dance field. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by the incredible Lucy McCrudden, founder and CEO of Dance Mama. So hi, Lucy. Welcome.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real privilege. I'm really happy to be here.
So excited to chat with you today. So we know this is rapid fire, so let's just jump in. First question, at what point in your career did you become a mother?
I was about 30, 31, and I started my career actually when I was 8. So you could say I was a few years in, but in terms of an adult, I used to be a child actor for the Royal Shakespeare Company. But in my kind of adult professional career, I was probably a good 10, 15 years into that, and mainly in the management of learning and participation initiatives. So things like over here, the Centre for Advanced Training, which is a government-funded project for young, exceptionally talented and has potential children aged 8 to 18 in the UK. But at that time, I was freelancing for Rambert and English National Ballet, or particularly for EMB on their Dance for Parkinson's programme. But for Rambert, I was working as an artist, teaching, writing education packs, all that kind of stuff. So that's the zone I was in at the time.
Very busy then, right? Like not very chill.
That's my mojo.
Right.
Mojo grandly busy.
So now, having your child and during like such a busy time, did you encounter any barriers?
Yes and no.
Okay.
First of all, I want to acknowledge the fortunate position I was in, because at Rambert, I had an amazing boss, Joss Giles, shout out to Joss, who was weirdly, his wife was pregnant within about a week of me. So we were obviously different dads. just get that, clarify that in there.
Yes, got it.
But Joss totally was on a sort of the same path at the same time, and he saw it as a real opportunity. So, and had that mindset. So I'm really fortunate for that. And what happened was I had a teaching assistant, so she could demonstrate towards the end of my 3rd trimester, when I felt like just my center of balance was, too off for pirouettes and jumping. Which was great for her because she was just finishing training at Rambert School, and I could mentor her. So it was a win-win. But also he enabled me to have other opportunities. I mean, I'd come from managing the CAT program, or Centre for Advanced Training, but he gave me opportunities to write the education packs for some of the performances that Rambert were doing at the time, and really thinking widely about how he could include me, because hopefully he could see the value in me as an artist and where I was at in terms of my life stage. So being really accommodating for that. So I was really lucky. However, in terms of the industry, there's a brilliant, which still exists, but only at that time, 10 years ago, a fact sheet produced by our industry advocacy body here in the UK called One Dance UK. And whilst that was absolutely excellent and on point, it just felt too small and not animated enough for the life stage I was going through. So I really had to turn to colleagues who I knew had become parents. And weirdly, again, I joke about this, but when I worked at London Contemporary Dance School, the place running the CAT, I was sort of known as off the record, as the fertility stick, because everybody who was opposite me became pregnant. And that was from the get-go. About 6 women, so amazing colleagues that I have, they were all pregnant, which is kind of weird and a bit spooky. So that had been quite normalized for me in a really good way. But I say that my peers, in terms of role models above, which are, which is definitely DDP area, not so much. But with that, there wasn't really any other help. And in the UK, compared to like France, so our next door neighbours across the channel, They have 12 weeks of postnatal physio as standard. We don't get that in the UK unless you're referred. And at the moment, women are not. So we usually have a standard postnatal check with our NHS system, the lovely NHS system, which is about 6 weeks. And I wasn't, women in the pandemic at the moment are not being checked. We know that their babies are being checked, but not them. So if you by chance get checked, your midwife gets dance, which is like gold dust, then you might get referred to a physio unless you're in a company that is supportive and understands, or you're proactive enough to look for that support yourself. So the first child I had, I was referred. The second, I just knew to go and see somebody straight away. But those were barriers. Also, a big barrier, I was freelance. So I didn't have the same security as I did the second time round when I was employed. And then that kind of really opened up lots of lovely, horrible nooks and crannies of fear, that you're not going to get back in, what's your identity, all of those sort of issues that are now we know are being explored academically for elite mothers in the UK, mainly in sport, but there's a bit of some of us going on in the dance sector looking at that. So that really sort of ignited my desire to turn some of those darker, frustrating moments into something that I wished had existed when I became a mum. And I delve into that a little bit more deeply. I'm going to name drop now because it's easier for the audience. I talked a bit more in depth on that in my TEDx talk, which I've just had my first anniversary of. So you can deep dive into that.
Yes, and we'll link it. It will be great.
But in a nutshell, kind of those are things. So, and I suppose the last major barrier that I didn't really think about until we got into the mix of things was childcare. In that we only have one living set of grandparents, and they're my parents, and they live 2 hours away. We don't have any other close family nearby. And we moved 2012 from London to a town just outside of London called Guildford. And we didn't know anyone. So when I was 6 months pregnant, so I had to completely build all of that social capital from scratch. But having said that, the social capital I'd had before was all pretty much work related. So all of those contacts, unless there'd been that little group of colleagues that had had children themselves, were not in that zone. So I think that the isolation was amplified by our move, but is very real and still a decade on. I'm really sad to say, with lots of people that we work with at Dance Mama who are out there becoming parents now.
It's really tough. That isolation part is tough. We've been hearing that. And with these barriers, which are very hard, were there like glimmers of support systems, right? Were there people that you were able, to turn to? Were there resources that were really helpful?
Absolutely not, which is why I created them.
Exactly. Which is why
what happened? And I guess probably to just go a little bit, expand on that. So that was like absolutely, like we're talking 2012. So 10, 11 years ago. And I have my daughter weirdly on 12/12/12. Anyway, spooky date. Lots of spooky things, this chat. So what kind of happened then was I thought I was going to return to work at 3 months, completely not realizing that my daughter would be dependent on me for breastfeeding. And that actually without any other support, that wasn't going to be possible. So I returned back at 6 months doing some teaching for the Royal Opera House on a project that they used to run for upskilling ballet teachers, looking at project management and that kind of thing. So it was a nice one to come back to. And then I became learning manager for Rambert, which was great because it's part-time, and they knew this at the time, but it was kind of like sidestepping in terms of career progression. And probably because I've been full-time manager of a course, this one was kind of sidestepping a bit in terms of level and amount of time I was there, so part-time. Then I became pregnant with my son, and around the same time, an organisation called Parents in Performing Arts Campaign was getting going. And that organisation is very similar to the Parent Artist Advocacy League that you have in the States. So PAL, we call it in the UK. I don't know how the American pronunciation. So that was kind of evolving at the same time. And because I felt so passionate about there not being any actual support or body specific to dance, I wrote an article for One Dance UK's magazine, interviewed some of those colleagues that I was referring to earlier. And it was through their stories I felt it needed a platform and a website. And so that's how Dance Mama grew, out of sharing that experience. And then from that, with my second child, my son, my lovely boss, Joss, left. And I interviewed for his the head of learning role when 8 days after having my son, because we know in dance opportunities are very slim and you've got to go for it. And I was really lucky and fortunate, but I also was very proactive in saying, I know I'm about to go on maternity leave. I kind of don't care. And I don't think you should either. So I'd like to do this role as a job share and put that as my solution, that person will cover the role during my maternity leave, which in the UK you can, well, it depends who you work for, but I took a year. And when I come back, then we'll go back to sharing, and that person will be okay with that, or you'll find another solution by that point to fill up their hours if they want to stay full time. And I was really fortunate that I'd worked for the company for a long time, that I felt empowered to do that, because we know there's loads of issues which I'm sure you guys know about in terms of the subservient culture, the autocratic culture, and dancers not being or dance workers not being able to speak up for themselves. So I think because I've been there a while and fiery, I felt able to do that. And so so I did the interview, which needed a presentation as well, like 8 days into having my son. Was successful with that. And then on my return, apart from the advent of Pippa, which I then became an ambassador for, I didn't really feel anything specific was going on for dance. So I've taken all of my learning and participation knowledge and applied it to building this organisation. So we're a non-profit. And we offer mentoring, so one-to-one or groups or with organisations. So we're currently working with a small organisation called Graceful Collective. We're working with bigger organisations in different ways, like Ballet Laurent, who are a company based in the northeast in England. But also the kind of flagship is Dance Mama Live, which is our online professional development programme, which this year has been funded by Arts Council England, as it was in its first incarnation, which is all in maternity. But this time we're working with 10 organisations nationally. And because it all kicked off on the pandemic, and I wanted to do things online because I know about mums being stuck at home anyway and needing to have that access. 3 of our sessions in this cycle are in person, and our next one in person is at Sadler's Wells, which is jolly nice. We've just done Birmingham at One Dance UK, of course, and then our final in person will be at Northern School of Contemporary Dance, which is in north of England in Leeds. So that kind of makeup of that, we always have the program structure of a webinar and a workshop. The webinars are a range of topics. It could be research, as you say, it could be psychology, physiology, and also bringing in the contacts that I'm finding through my research in other disciplines such as sport or public health. So recently we've had a positive psychologist who's been working with Team GB cycling, for example. And in the past, we've had Dr. Steve Ingham, who's an eminent physiologist to about 200 British Olympians. And he worked with an Olympian who was the face of the 2012 Games, actually, Dame Jess Ennis-Hill, who infamously in our country got a silver at Rio in 2016 and a world title when she'd had her son postnatally. So what was brilliant about Steve, he was able to give us an insight in how that looks in terms of a very well resourced place, and what lessons we bring over to those who are in a more disadvantaged place as freelance dancers in the UK. Then the workshops have a range of dance styles, so ballet, salsa, movement direction. We've had Six the Musical recently. Lots of lovely workshops where mums can who are working in dance, who might not be able to get to a workshop for a variety of reasons that we've already highlighted: childcare, travel as a barrier, but also importantly, culturally, the inclusivity might not be there yet for them to rock up with a pram or a bump, which we're all working on very hard to change. But it enables them to take part at home, a bit like we all did online during the pandemic.
Exactly.
Crucially, we record all of that content so they can watch them as replays and do them on their own schedule. And we know that this population, because I'm one of them, we're all super busy, and try that feeling of disconnection continues even when you're getting back into work, because the culture and the systems are not there to support an individual. So that's totally why we've designed that program in the way that we have, and trying to program it with the best talent and information that we can find. Incredible. And then also we have a research aspect. So I've picked up the shovel, we were laughing about this earlier, in camaraderie and solidarity. I'm doing a PhD at Canterbury. And from that side of things, as an organisation, I'm particularly looking at those postnatal professional dancers and career progression, etc., in that life phase. But because there's very little, and talking to you guys, of course, queens of data, you know that too. Kind of the lit review is kind of a bit like, oh well, this isn't too bad because there's nothing there. And we know it well. So trying to contribute what we can to that, and hosting any information that we find on our site, and having reciprocal links and all that kind of stuff to really support people. But also with that, out of that, around the same time I first got my Arts Council funding back in 2021, I co-founded an international organisation, or sort of network really, with Professor Ali Duffy from Texas Tech in the States. So shout out to Ali. And that is that's kind of evolved now into brilliantly more academically based network, which Aoife McGraw, who's a researcher at Queen's University Belfast and head of the arts programs there, she's led on getting the Arts and Humanities Research Council funding for that group. So she's Magnum PI. She's the PI on that. And Ali's the investigator and instigator. And basically, Dance Mama is holding that network on our site, and we'll have 3 seminars over the next 18 months in Belfast, at Christchurch, Canterbury, and shout out also to my supervisor, Professor Angela Pickard, for that. And then hopefully I'll be over in Texas for the final one in autumn 2024, which will be great. So all of that has kind of really kicked off, and kind of with that as well, we've got like a national network that we run too, and we're also, you know, in the mix in our locality where we're based as well, because if we don't encourage women to stay in their careers, we know that 7 out of 10 from the British research from parents and carers in performing arts, from their COVID survey in 2021, 7 out of 10 are considering leaving their careers. And we know that there are so many talented, gifted people. We are hemorrhaging. And the frustration is that those people have gained an amazing amount of life experience and skill that actually enriches their artistry, their practice, and has so much value to give to the sector. And it's for all of those reasons, and thinking of all of those people that I know that haven't continued. And, you know, we were talking about this earlier. I think that is that I try and harness that frustration,
right,
get it in the fire, and then try and find a way of keeping them in if they want to come in. And I think that's the important thing as well, is positive exit strategy.
Yep.
And we have an organisation over here called Dancers Career Development, which enables dancers to do that, which is really important, and applying their creativity and skills to other sectors. But I think there's a lot of people who unnecessarily have to leave their careers because of all of the pressure we talked about. And that, as you know, bringing it back to DDP, as you well know, that has a knock-on effect to leadership, representation, around board tables, in executive positions, but crucially as well, producers. And I think that's something as well that really grinds my gears, I suppose. In that, who is choosing what we see, and then the audience that is watching that, is that person representative of those audiences? And starting to help, particularly women, start to question that a little bit. So
that starts to happen.
All of those levels. So
I think it's starting to happen. I think we're seeing people questioning more and feeling a little more critique about the system, and like incredible organizations like yours being able to say, here's access points, here's workshops, here's information, here's camaraderie, right? Here's agency. I think these things are so vital for the dance ecosystem.
Thank you, because I think that's something really dancers love, is we love connection. We dance to express and connect with people. We love the chat before and after class. We all love that.
100%.
And the camaraderie of moving across the floor in a really difficult combination, but feeling those gorgeous moments when you're synchronized and together, but also having the family-ish bond when things go wrong. And being supportive and having fun and feeling that joy. And I think as much as research is really important to me, it's the animation of it, I guess, has been a hallmark through my career as an adult, in terms of how can I lift the lid on something, that curiosity, how does that work, what's going on there, and then sharing that with other people so it can ignite something in them, and they can look, take that curiosity and their passion. And like you say, that kind of inequity is so frustrating, and not just the inequity in terms of gender, any inequity is just appalling. And we're going to do everything we can in the time we've got to do what we can about it, and try and change some of those percentages, because it's just wrong. It's
that's the work we need to do, right? We identify these inequities, and how are we finding solutions and access points and being change makers in the sector. So thinking about changing systems, okay, can we talk about partnerships for a minute? You know, this is something that comes up a lot. So how are we encouraging and wanting, needing, support from partners, particularly those that are like male identifying and playing a more equal role in parenting? Well, we hear a lot from mothers, and I think you brought it up too, especially if you're breastfeeding, like the child is so reliant on the mother. So we know, especially in those early stages, that it's not going to be a 50-50 split. We understand that. But are there ways, I don't know,
absolutely, there's loads of ways.
Like tell us your thoughts. I
think so. First of all, whoever they are and whoever we're trying to advocate to, but obviously I'll deal with the gender bit in a minute, is looking at, again, what pushes their buttons, what results do they want to see, and what are they about? And usually in terms of the kind of very top echelons, it's about the bottom line and audience figures, though the kind of engagement figures as well as the finances, and usually they're charities or non-profits in terms of how that works, particularly in the UK. And obviously I'm coming from that perspective. It's how can we evidence how it will help increase those bottom lines, I suppose. So that's, I think for a lot of corporate people as well, understanding that there's two forms of currency that we have to speak, money and people. That's really important for dance in particular, in terms of those engaging. Yeah. So with that, I think the work that DDP does already in terms of capturing that, the surveillance on it, is excellent. I would love to see a similar kind of thing in the UK, which at the moment doesn't quite exist in the same way. We have AWA Dance, which is starting to look into some of that research, and again sharing that data internationally, so we can see those comparisons country to country. But also in terms of the evidence around the artistry and that kind of thing, and that qualitative side is really, really difficult. So how we've gone about that is our podcast, where we interview different people in a similar way to this. I'll give you the example of Kate Flatt. So Kate Flatt is the original choreographer for Les Miserables, and she choreographed that in 1985 with the Royal Shakespeare Company, with a very young baby and a 4-year-old. And please, have a listen to that. But in a nutshell, and I'll paraphrase Kate if she will allow me, is Cameron McIntosh, the producer. He supported her financially to have a nanny, and also to have a flat in London, in an area in London called the Barbican, near to where they were rehearsing, to enable her to do that. That bar was set in mid-80s by a man. What the hell has happened, right? And I know they're very well resourced in comparison to a lot of other organizations, but I think championing those case studies where somebody has already done it, and done it to such success, then look at the success of Les Miserables. And Kate talks about this very openly. They didn't know it was going to be that much of a success. She just got a feeling when she got a call from Trevor Nunn that she really should do this job. And I think Kate is a fantastic British example of somebody who's been really supported as a mother and created one of the most, probably if not the most memorable musical of the last 40 years. So I think it's championing those case studies and really finding those moments with those executives to do that. And then in terms of the kind of working practices, making it more inclusive. Now, we have a range of different models in the UK. We've got more established companies that some of them are like 70, 80 years old, like the Royal Ballet Company. And they're big machines. They're with the Royal Opera House. There's a whole opera team going on. They've got learning participation. They employ a huge amount of people. So it's a huge machine. And one of the practicalities around that is scheduling. And we all know that to get your childcare ducks in a row, so that was very British of me, wasn't it? Get your ducks in a row. You must be organised, my dear, and get ahead. But of course, we're working in a creative environment where that might not necessarily be the modus operandi. And the reactive nature, and again, on small scale, mid scale, any kind of company, because there's so many different moving parts, makes it hugely challenging. So I know for a fact that the Royal are fantastic in that I have seen with these pair of eyes, babies studios, babies with Mars in the green room near the studio, and the Royal Ballet dancers do an amazing job in advocating for that. Lauren Cuthbert's son is very public about that. One of their current dancers, Olivia, is fantastic at doing that and really showing that and that visibility. And that's another kind of issue, is the visibility, is the more, if we can see it, we can do it, and I know you kind of got to dream it to believe it. Lots of things here, but having more and more normalizing role models is important. And we know in the States, obviously there is Dancers and Motherhood, who are doing a good job in terms of profile raising, from really giving these real life examples obviously Ingrid Silver, all of those companies, you know, Dance from Martha Graham, which is fantastic. And I think the kind of more pressure in that way, and with sports, of course, you've got Serena Williams, all of those kind of big, and Beyonce, you've got all of those other kind of huge role models. Adele, you know, the Las Vegas gig for her is perfect in terms of childcare. She's got loads of stability. And I think what we come back to a lot in our mentoring sessions and with the participants is a dance career is really chaotic. Being a parent is really chaotic. So trying to find that stability somewhere, some structure to hook everything else around is really important to make all of that possible, and for your own sanity. So that advanced scheduling is actually, it sounds so basic, but is actually necessary. Really key in helping people. And then there's different funding models in the UK, and let's face it, the UK is in a bit of a funny phase at the moment. We keep changing prime ministers every 5 minutes. We've got loads of drama, you know, good, bad, all of that stuff with the royal family. We're currently, and I don't know how well aware Americans are at the moment, we've currently got a school strike on today. So we've had schools striking on and off since Christmas, universities. So today is actually a good example in that one of my children is within her education at school. My son isn't. Plus, both me and my husband are working, and the challenges of juggling all of that are really huge. So I think in terms of supporting childcare, we also have one of the most expensive childcare systems in the world. That what happens, and this absolutely happened, I'll be very open with you, when I was head of learning at Rambert, was even though my salary was considered a good salary, all of it was going on nursery fees and travel to work. So my net when I got home was zero, other than keeping a foot on the ladder. And that is the same story for so many just generally working women in the UK. And so many people who want to be economically active can't afford to do so. And there's a brilliant charity called Pregnant Then Screwed, who is founded by a lady called Joelle Brearley, who was, I believe, made redundant on her maternity leave. Who champions for women who've been in the same situation, but is a really key figure in the UK at the moment, who is lobbying government and doing lots of campaigning with, you know, all of us, although we're niche of a niche, are really grateful to her for the work she's doing, because the childcare challenge is huge. And as I said, sort of bring it back to sort of me as a case study, without grandparents nearby, or a full set, or family nearby, we have to try and work, and particularly me, because my husband's full-time in tech, try and work every pocket of time that is sent to keep things moving forward. And I guess I'm happy to do that because I'm passionate and I want to do something about it, but it's not easy. And I guess I advocate for this lifestyle, but I always say it's not an easy route. But also around that, I lean into my dancer skills of resourcefulness, creativity, improvisation, discipline. And again, it's all of those things, those skills that we have that get amplified when we've got increased caring responsibility. And again, you know, as Pippa campaign highlights, it's also responsibility of other family members, not just children. That means I am very efficient and I am very productive, because if I have a window of opportunity, I am going to absolutely give it my all. And again, I suppose in another example of that, I interviewed Stephen McCrae, who's the principal at the Royal Ballet Company, to get the male perspective. His wife, Elizabeth Harrod, was also a dancer at the company, and they have, I think it's 3 children.
Wow.
And they were both, until recently, they were both dancing for most of that time. And some of you might know Stephen, I suppose, in the States. If you haven't seen Raw Ballet stuff, he was in the recent Cats film. He's in that. But he talked about, you know, sharing roles and not doing necessarily 8 shows a week. And that's something we have seen in the West End with 42nd Street, where the lead in that shared their role for maternity reasons. And we're starting to see some of that happen. But on the negative side, sleep deprivation, that affects everybody.
Exhaustion.
And, you know, he talks about having 4 cups of coffee before going in the studio with Wayne McGregor. And it's just exposing what people are doing to make it happen. And I just don't think all of the things that are happening that might not be quite as healthy
those survival mechanisms
need to happen. And it's really got luck, isn't it? I mean, there seems to be a bit of a pattern if you've got, but not always the case, but generally, if you've got a parent who's in the creative team, in the senior creative team, then generally there is more empathy and understanding because of that lived experience. But what we're trying to do is talk about the ins and outs of best practice in terms of looking after those people, because there's quite frankly a duty of care. So we also work closely with a charity based in the UK called Active Pregnancy Foundation. And they have helped support our Chief Medical Officer guidelines. So I think the equivalent, is it called the Surgeon General?
Yes, the Surgeon General, correct.
Similar equivalent. So we have guidelines for pre and postnatal activity. So with that, I've actually trained as a This Mum Moves ambassador. And what I do with that is we talk about the scientifically based ins and outs of the guidance pre and postnatally to the general public population. But we also talk about how that would apply in either recreational or professional dance context for ourselves, for our colleagues, and for our participants. And I'm hoping with that work that we're starting to do, that continuing professional development or educational learning opportunities professionally will hope to start chip away at the need, shifting the needle on the cultural side. And I guess as I'm a Americaphile, as I've already said to you, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. So a lot of my reading over my maternity, it has been in The Daring Way and Dare to Lead and Braving the Wilderness. And I suppose I'm just shouting out because I know, like, lots of your audience will know her. National institution, surely. Those principles she stands for are what we are hoping and striving to embed in our organisation, because they just apply so much to dance. Dancers are vulnerable in so many ways, and they're brave. And that's really where we get that, hopefully, that underpinning in everything we're doing. So we just need to kind of...
I have Brene at the heart, right next to me. So I'm with you. I think about how her work really resonates with artists a lot. I take so many notes.
Joy.
It's
this conversation. Yes. I am joy. Totally joyful. Absolutely, really does resonate so much. And I just think it's exciting. There's so much we can do. There's so many small things that we can do that make a big difference.
Absolutely.
But it's just finding ways to get those people to listen. And usually it's the numbers, and bring it back around to the data. That's where that quantitative data really helps get into their language and then help them understand. Yeah.
So Lucy, last thoughts. Like, are there any additional ways companies, maybe venues, we talk about, service organizations, and even DDP? What about us? Are there other ways that we can continue to advocate and support mothers in the dance field?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, hats off to DDP because you're doing so much already, doing some amazing stuff. You've got great resources on there. I absolutely love all the financial literacy stuff you've got there as well, which is so important for artists to start to have a real understanding about, as well as, of course, the research that you've got and all of the marketing and communications around getting that message out there, which is great. I would definitely say, I'm sure you've already had Professor Ali Duffy on, but having that connection through the International Parenting and Dance Network is going to be great in terms of reciprocally sharing that information. But I guess really it's around family-friendly policies, that inclusive working practice, the communication that we have with those people who are becoming parents. And I say people because although we're labeled Dance Mama because I founded it, that's how I identify. We absolutely don't exclude anyone who is from the LGBTQ plus community. And also, of course, Dance Papas, because all of those changes they're going through, we're, as parents, we're all going through that similar journey, and that constant communication with your rehearsal director, choreographer, or your leadership team, whoever it is, your lineup, your manager, because you're going through rapid changes, whether you're adopting, whether you're a biologically carrying parent, whatever, however that's happening for you. The change in those 9 months is really rapid, or indeed the adoption process. So keeping that communication open and regular really, really, really helps. And particularly that support through the physical development. I know that there are guidelines in the States. And I know it's not the same country, but same continent. I also want to say a big shout out to Balancing Act Canada. And also Dr. Margie Davenport, who's based in Canada, who's a researcher, for all the amazing work that she has done in creating guidelines, which has really triggered a lot of activity across English-speaking countries. So now Australia has guidelines, all these different countries. But Balancing Act Canada do a fantastic job as well. And it's about how we can embed these best practices that are relevant to our own countries, and also support those in developing countries where there might be loads of different reasons, being completely different contexts as to why being a parent in dance is, not even a thing, or how that's existing in communities where dance exists in a different way to a more commercialized activity. So I'm thinking more kind of the indigenous population in Australia, for example, that those dance practitioners there are just as valuable as a Royal Ballet dancer. Absolutely. How are they working with their parent population? So I think for organizations, it's thinking broadly and inclusively with empathy. And if they need schooling up on empathy, we know we've got Brene Brown to go to for that. Absolutely. Go and read it. Constantly tweeting our Prime Minister. Would you like to, can I introduce you to we don't all do maths, Mr. Sunak. Anyway, I'm being a bit cheeky and political. But I think those are the key things. And just having respect for raising a family, because I suppose, and this is probably the final, gosh, I can talk for hours, but I think the final kind of culmination is that dance is really about that connecting. We know our bodies, all of that amazing, rich information. Yeah. But generally from, I don't know, whenever we've started dancing, 4, 5 or a bit later, when you get into it, it's like, this is the main thing that matters and nothing else. And that is happening at a time where our brains are developing and usually happens before our prefrontal cortex has fully, got to its place. So we have this system 1 programming that we have to constantly undo when we become a parent, because you're jockeying priorities. And that kind of jockeying of that and that priority shift internally is very difficult for dance people to cope with psychologically, but also it's the value and those self-esteem issues and that external validation. We're certainly not seeing it there in inclusivity. So I think sort of that kind of final point, what am I trying to say, is raising a child is just as, if not more, important than your dance career. And that has to be respected, and it has to be given space and held well. But also, if you're inclusive to it, the gifts that artist or worker, producer, stage crew, whoever give through that experience of constant negotiation, raising children, all of those skills, then you've got some really amazing, solid people who will be able to give the best to that organization and give the best of themselves. And it's just trying to get people to kind of see that.
Brilliant recommendations for the field. So thanks, Lucy. Thank you so much for this and chatting with me today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Bye, everybody.